Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio, where we get really therapeutic with our geeky desires. We indulge in our nerdiness, our dorkiness, our geekiness. We are all geeks about something. I always forget that I follow the Outlaw Dave Show. So I want to just, while I'm thinking about it and while I remember it, the audience coming from Outlaw Dave Show to me, thank you for being here. I hope you've been enjoying the show these past couple years as I follow Outlaw Dave. Outlaw Dave has been a mentor of mine for years, and it was not lost on me how cool it was to know that my time slot would move. When did I move to the 10 p.m. time slot? A year ago? About a year ago? Maybe last January, February, something like that. To follow Outlaw Dave, because I've been on his show and I've produced his show a lot. And it was just wonderful to be able to follow him. So thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio, following the Outlaw Dave Show, especially if you're an Outlaw Dave fan. I have filled in for Outlaw Dave a few times, once or twice that I can remember. And the most recently, a few months ago, when was it? But I talked about, to keep it in the vein of the Outlaw Dave Show, remember me saying that we're all geeks about something? Well, there are a lot of folks who listen to the Outlaw Dave Show who are, like myself, geeks about motorcycles. So the segment I did on his show was kind of tying it into the ultra nerd realm, like motorcycles for nerds, in that Harley Davidson has an electric motorcycle. We have EV cars like Tesla and what have you, but now we're getting into EV motorcycles, and let me tell you, they haul double money signs. Since I don't know when this segment will broadcast in the future, it might not be past the watershed if it ever gets re-aired. So, those electric motorcycles haul butt, and you got to think about that, because for some reason, if you're not as informed as somebody else and maybe haven't thought about EVs, electric motors have instant torque. That's always been a huge thing with motorcycles, is that you have torque on tap because the bike is so light, the engine really doesn't have... The power to weight ratio is much greater than in a traditional cager or traditional four-wheel car. So electric motorcycle is going to be all the faster, especially in initial acceleration, whereas motorcycles have already been quite a bit faster for years than their four-wheeled counterparts in terms of acceleration. So yeah, electric motorcycles, it seems like a natural fit. If your riding partner has had a hard time holding on to your 1500cc Harley, it's going to your partner's going to have a hard time holding on, believe me, when riding tandem on an electric motorcycle. So anyways, we're all geeks about something. I love motorcycles. Is anybody else kind of... I think we come to this point in our life, if you're somebody who loves motorcycles and likes riding motorcycles, for a lot of us, and I'm not sure what this says, does this mean that I'm wise, you're wise, or does this mean that we're wimps, and that you get to a certain age where you're thinking, I love riding motorcycles, but at some point, just like the risk becomes apparent. You have so many close calls. You have too many close calls. You see, if you ride bikes, you know somebody who's died. Not to bring it down low, but we know somebody, even if you don't ride motorcycles, but especially if you are a rider, you know people who have died riding motorcycles. And with a motorcycle, it's not a matter of if you'll go down. It's always a matter of when you'll go down again. If you've gone down once, you're going to go down again. You will lay down your bike at some point. And you just wonder, when does the chrome hit the pavement, but I don't survive it? a lot of times it's a low speed scenario and you jump off your bike and you have a few bumps and bruises and what have you, but it could be a lot worse. And for for many motorcycle riders, it is a lot worse, and it just kind of runs through your mind. You get older, especially, well, one, when you get married, and two, more especially when you have kids. You just think, is this risk worth it? Is the thrill of riding a motorcycle, is that joy worth, leaving your spouse and kids in the lurch? So I guess with a lot of hobbies and a lot of different geeky things, it comes to a balance. Maybe you're not riding to work every day. Maybe you're not putting on a backpack and going to the grocery store to get milk on your motorcycle every single day. Maybe you have a car at this point and then you ride the motorcycle on the weekends or just around, the neighborhood, something like that. I think that's, honestly, that's where I've been my entire time of owning a motorcycle. I don't own a motorcycle anymore. I've had a few bikes in the past, but I've always been the one to kind of, do most of my riding around or under 45 miles per hour, if you get my drift. I never liked getting on the freeway because I've lived in Houston since 1989. When I see motorcycles on the freeway, it makes me, especially some people who are just wearing sandals, shorts, no helmet. It's suicidal. It's absolutely suicidal. And if it's not suicidal, it's just stupid. And let's say the type of person who went down wearing sandals and shorts and no helmet. If that was my friend, I would go to the funeral pissed off. Yes, I'd be sad my friend is gone, but 90% of it would be anger. And it'd be a closed casket, but I walk up to the casket, put my hand on the casket and say, "Why were you such a fool? Why wouldn't you just put on it's a silly way. It's a silly risk." So maybe I'm a wimp. That's fine. Call me a wimp. I don't like getting on the freeways on a motorcycle. It is a level of bad news and unnecessary risk I am not willing to take. So I like to cruise around the neighborhoods whenever I'm on a motorcycle, just around in town, which also I know is dangerous. It's inherently dangerous, but life is boring if we don't do some things that are just a little bit inherently dangerous. Working out is inherently dangerous. So anyways, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. We'll talk about some techie stuff, some geeky stuff. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Just want to remind you that the podcast is available 5 nights a week, usually 5 nights a week. This past week over the holidays, I think I will admit I did 3 nights a week this week, maybe. But they were long ones. They were longer than typical. So anyways, I shoot for 5 nights a week. I've been pretty good about the 5 nights a week. Podcasting. I will get back on track, I promise you. Things just got kind of busy this week. Anyway, so you can find the podcast, Geek Therapy Radio, on your favorite podcast app. I love listening to podcasts on my iPad. Just Apple's own little podcast app right there is great. Of course, the iHeartRadio app. So there's all sorts of other podcast, FM player, Podbean, there's tons of podcast apps. Just search Geek Therapy Radio and it's in there. And I cover a gamut of things on there. Also, and I'll promise I'll finish my thoughts on motorcycles in just a moment. The YouTube channel, as I check it right now, it's at 1,943 subscribers. So I'm about to cross that 2,000 subscriber threshold. The first 1,000 subscribers took couple 2 or 3 years since I uploaded a channel, and the last 1,000 subscribers have come within just a few months. So that's just kind of the way it goes when you're trying to build an audience. And you go through these dark times. If your goal is to build an audience and put out content and that kind of stuff, whether it's a podcast, a radio show, YouTube channel, what have you, doesn't matter. Twitch channel, game live streaming, I should say. You go through all the doldrums, all the self-doubt. No one cares. No one's watching. No one's finding it. Why am I doing this? And you go through that for a long time. Well, long in our modern world where gratification and satisfaction has to be instant. If you're trying to do something creative and putting it out the world and get people to pay attention to it, it takes a long time. And it's a grind. It is a grind. So I'm very happy that right now I'm getting about, as far as YouTube is concerned, about 100 subscribers a month, new subscribers a month. So it's something. It's not a big multi-million subscriber channel, 10 million subscribers, anything like that. But you know what? It used to be a big fat zero. Big fat zero. So there's something to it. There's something to sticking with it. Stick with it. If you're trying to put out something creative, just stick with it. And I will say that the biggest critic is yourself. The biggest harbinger. Is that a word? Of doubt is yourself, is your own brain. And you'll find that when you create things and you go back and you listen to it with I call it like a passive ear. You know, sometimes I go back and listen to my show or go back and watch old YouTube videos or something like that. And just as just a viewer, just try to take myself out of it. Having put enough distance between that content I created and when I go back to watch it or listen to it. So, yes, when I go back to listen to my first episodes of Geek Therapy Radio from 2016, I think I started, you can tell I was a youthful boy, that it was all brand new, and I'm just getting my sea legs there at midnight, Sunday morning. You can definitely sense growth, but when I go back to listen to things from a few months ago, I'll click on something that, I don't remember. I recorded the show, but I don't remember exactly what I said about a subject, so I can go back with these fresh ears, just kind of listen to what I'm saying. Is this entertaining, what I'm talking about? Is this information useful, what I'm talking about? Is the product decent? And I try not to be delusional about it. And there are some things that I do hear. I'm like, okay, that was just patently wrong. That's where I love involving my listeners. You can email me, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. We're a geek community since we're all geeks about something. So if I touch on aviation and I get the terms wrong, V1 and VR and all this kind of stuff, I count on you to reach out and kind of correct me, share knowledge. But overall, the grade I would give myself is, I don't want to say, I would pass. I'll just use the phrase C's get degrees in terms of the quality of content of Geek Therapy Radio. I don't know. You listening may think it's absolutely wonderful. I get a lot of satisfaction out of what I do. Absolutely. So I don't question what I do. I don't have second guessing doubts and regrets about the content I put out there, but being objective and just listening to it as a consumer, as a content consumer, it's okay. It's okay to me. If I come away from it thinking I would listen to that, then I know that I'm on the right track because I am my own worst critic. If you're a creative, like I mentioned before, you're your own worst critic. And sometimes the only critic bringing you down or killing your content or taking the passion and the wind out of your sails isn't anybody else. It's you. It's the own demon in your head telling you you're not good enough. What you're doing is not worthy. What you're doing is not worth it. No one's going to like it. No one's going to like you. That is patently false. That's bullcrap. I still know I need to wrap up my motorcycle thoughts. But I will say, as far as content creation is concerned, there's this big misconception that you need to appeal to as many people as possible. That if you don't have a lot of listeners, if you don't have a lot of followers on social media, if you don't have a lot of subscribers on Twitch or YouTube or your podcast, that it's because you're not appealing to the masses. You don't need to try to appeal to the masses. Get that out of your head from the start if you're starting to create some content. You're not trying to make this thing that appeals to a 13-year-old as much as it appeals to a 90-year-old. I try to do that as best I can with Geek Therapy Radio. I've had a guest on in the past where we talk about knitting. I've had video game programmers on my show. So I run the gamut, and if it happens to appeal to a certain age group, that's fine. But by default, I'm not trying to, every word out of my mouth is not trying to draw in the 16-year-old kid like it's trying to draw in a 90-year-old. No. Here's the simple patent truth to all of this. No matter what your content is, like what you're talking about, people are subscribing to you. It's almost like the content and the titles and the descriptions and what you're going to talk about inside of your content, that's like the attractiveness. That's the initial attraction. But the only thing that guarantees a second date, which can lead to a third date and a fourth date, and then being exclusive and then getting engaged and getting married, is you, your character. People are either going to bond to you to such a point that it doesn't matter exactly what you're talking about. When people follow a certain personality in the media, they can talk about potatoes for an hour. It can be a tech channel or something like that. It could be political, but if you've subscribed to the person, if you're in a relationship basically with the person that you're listening to, you'll listen to that person talk about a potato for an hour. So keep that in mind. Try to be as genuine as possible with yourself. Yes, it's important to pronunciate and kind of have an extra little, if the audio is super terrible, if things are just bad and it's unlistenable, that's one thing. But the most important thing is to be yourself. People they're going to subscribe to you. They're not going to subscribe to your content. They're going to subscribe to you. It's going to become this familiarity. When I see on YouTube, people say, oh, and so-and-so uploaded a new video, all is right with the world, or I was going to go to sleep, but then so-and-so uploaded a new video. It's not because of the content of the video. It's because it's like a familiar friend is saying something new, basically. So they're subscribing to the person, not the content. To wrap up the segment, I'll finish my motorcycle thought because it's very quick. Yes, I have used the freeway on my motorcycle sparingly, and yes, I have done something stupid once, at least, on the freeway and the motorcycle at 4 a.m. going home from work, and I took the bike to see how fast it would go, and it was over 100 miles an hour. Was it worth it? Not really, but I survived. I would never do it again, but we all do silly things once in a while. Thank God that despite ourselves, we survived. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Thanks for listening to me in this broadcast. This is the radio show, isn't it? Well, it's also podcasted. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I am, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. And in this segment, I wanted to kind of talk about, I want to try to clear things up, at least a little bit, when it comes to all of this 5G cellular network talk that you hear. And what really spurred this is T-Mobile's new 5G expanded network. I have T-Mobile. I don't have... Obviously, they're not sponsoring my show. They're not sponsoring this content or anything like that. But I have T-Mobile, and I will say right now that in this case, T-Mobile is part of this problem, part of this confusion. When it was first promised to us, our first inkling of what 5G was supposed to be was this new ultra-high bandwidth, ultra high frequency, super high speed network, mobile data network. So we're talking speeds over a gigabit per second. So when you go test your phone's download speeds, I like to use a service called Ookla. You can get the Ookla app, Ookla. Lets you test not only your cell phone's network speed, but also your home Wi-Fi and your home Ethernet. So you can get Ookla, just type in Ookla into your browser, and if you have a wired internet connection, your Ethernet connection, it'll test the speed. It's basically just a network speed test. So as it was initially advertised, initially touted 5G was supposed to be this mobile broadband network capable of speeds in excess of 1 gigabit. That's in excess of 1,000 gigabits per second. I don't like measuring in gigabits, so I always divide the number by 8. So 1,000 divided by 8 means that it's 125 megabytes per second. And the reason I do that is because when you transfer files on your computer, let's say you copy a big giant file from one folder to another hard drive on your system, it measures it by default in megabytes per second. So when you have a 1 gigabyte file that it transfers at 125 megabytes per second means that it's going to transfer in 6 or 7 seconds or so. So anyways, blah blah blah. 5G was supposed to be this over a gigabit internet, mobile broadband, mobile data connection. A bit is just one single bit of information. A byte is 8 bits. So 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, whatever, how many 8. Those ones and zeros are the bits. The chunks of 8 are a byte. So now you know. But that's aside from the point. The confusion over 5G was supposed to be this ultra-high frequency that allowed for these ultra-high transfer speeds of over a gigabit per second. So I did an entire, I forget if it was a podcast or just a YouTube video explaining what 5G is supposed to be. And basically, in a nutshell, it was touted as frequencies, bandwidth above 5 gigahertz. So your router at home, if you have a high-speed internet router, you have a 5 gigahertz router. That corresponds to this confusion with the 5G network. Is it 5 gigahertz? Well, it's actually way supposed to be way above 5 gigahertz, in between something on the order of 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz. The problem here, though, is physics. 20 gigahertz, 100 gigahertz, now you're getting into this ultra-high frequency, but very weak powered signal that has a hard time penetrating and cannot penetrate even molecules of water in the air. So let's say they roll out this 5G network that's over 20 gigahertz in its bandwidth. It gets foggy, you're done. It gets foggy, you're off that 5G network because the signal literally can't penetrate microscopic water droplets in the air, let alone a pane of glass if you're inside of a building. God forbid a brick on the exterior of a building. And bear with me, this confusion you're feeling, that's all part of it. So T-Mobile has recently rolled out their 5G network. What was it, Sprint or Verizon had the 5GE network? It's all this confusion. All of this confusion. So the T-Mobile 5G network, you'd think, it's this super high bandwidth network, 20 gigahertz. It allows me the 1 gigabit per second download speeds, but I have to be right next to a transmitter in a big city because as soon as I turn a corner, I will be off the network. You can't see it. It can't penetrate buildings or go around corners. That's all true. So why do they call it 5G? Well, it's actually down in the 600 megahertz band. Do you remember old cordless phones? Remember, this is going back 20 years, 900 megahertz cordless phones? Towards the end of cordless phones, you got 2.4 gigahertz. Maybe they have 5 gigahertz cordless phones now. But those 900 megahertz cordless phones, this 5G T-Mobile network is operating below that. It's operating at 600 megahertz. It's operating 300 megahertz below that. So you're thinking, what about all this 20 gigahertz through 100 gigahertz stuff and gigabit Ethernet, or mobile data they're talking about? We don't have that yet, especially not large scale. They've installed a few little test cells around some major cities, and you literally have to be within a few yards of the pole, of the antenna, to see those super high gigabit speeds. As soon as you if you put your palm in between the antenna in your phone and that antenna of the transmitter, transceiver, and the tower, you're off the network. You're done. You're back to 4G. It's all so confusing. I will say the benefit of T-Mobile's 5G network, even though it's not the 5G that it was initially promised, is that 600 megahertz is a much more powerful bandwidth. It has much more penetrating power to get through solid concrete, get through walls, let alone glass and water droplets in the air. So you have more coverage. You can get further and further away from the transmitter, the lower in bandwidth you get. Case in point of this, your internet router, your Wi-Fi router, usually nowadays sends out two signals, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. Have you noticed that you can't get more than a room or two away, sometimes even just one wall away from your 5 gigahertz router before you drop the signal, or the signal gets dramatically weaker and even switches to the lower 2.4 gigahertz signal? That's because the 5 gigahertz signal cannot penetrate walls like a 2.4 gigahertz signal can. An even more relatable way to think of this is think of audio speakers. So subwoofers and tweeters. Close the door from one, let's say you blast out this very bass heavy music. As soon as you close the door, like you exit the room and close the door, what happens? Almost all of the high frequencies go away, and all you can hear now is the thud, thud, thud. So picture walking outside of a club that has the music blasting. When you're outside of the club, you hear the thud, thud, thud of the low frequency pressure making its way outside. As soon as you open the door, you're blasted by all the high frequencies. That's because those low frequencies can penetrate and travel, have more energy than the high frequencies. That's exactly what happens with electromagnetic transmission. So your cell phone signals, your Wi-Fi router signals, everything like that. The lower the frequency, the more penetrating power, aka the more coverage, the further the signal reaches. AM radio operates in the kilohertz for the most part, in the kilohertz range of the electromagnetic range. That's why you can hear, also due to atmospheric bounce and everything like that, you can hear WOAI in San Antonio all the way in Hawaii sometimes. That's why a better example is that you can hear really powerful stations in the center plains of the United States. States and states and states away, all the way up into Canada, you can hear very powerful stations like WOAI in San Antonio. It's just blasting line of sight, basically, well, to the horizon, then it bounces off the atmosphere down again. AM radio, the AM frequency range can travel very far. As a matter of fact, our sister station to KPRC, I run KTRH during the days during the week, and as soon as the sun sets, we have to go down from 50,000 watts to, I forget what it is, 20,000 watts, something like that. Because as soon as you stop competing with the sun's electromagnetic radiation, then your signal, a 50,000 watt signal, would blow out every other AM radio station for 100 miles at least. So when the sun goes down, we have to downgrade the power of our antennas because the kilohertz frequency range travels with a lot more energy than FM that operates in the megahertz frequency range. Similarly to 5 gigahertz in your 2.4 gigahertz router, what the higher frequencies allow, what the higher bandwidth allows, is higher fidelity. You get a better, more crisp signal, so you have better bass, better highs when you listen to FM versus when you listen to AM radio. That's why AM radio is more for talking. And I'm at a break. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Man, I'm geeking out. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Okay, to wrap up my thoughts from the last segment, basically think of the frequency range of transmission, so 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, 600 megahertz, AM radio, FM radio. The lower you get in the bandwidth, the lower the fidelity, the slower the data speeds, depending on what's being transferred over those frequencies, but the more penetrating power and the farther that signal can go. Versus going up in the frequency spectrum, the higher fidelity you can get, the faster the data transfer speeds you can get, but the lower and the weaker the transmitting power. So high frequency things like your 5 gigahertz router at home they have a hard time penetrating a wooden door versus 2.4 gigahertz, which is half that frequency, which can go right through it for multiple rooms. So that all goes to the confusion of this 5G cellular networks that we've been promised. That initially it was between 20 and 100 gigahertz, which cannot penetrate water molecules, which means even if they rolled it out, the fog would destroy the network. You'd be off the 5G network at those frequency ranges. So T-Mobile and Verizon and other carriers are basically not being honest with us in that they're rolling out this 5G network, but it turns out in T-Mobile's case, it's at 600 megahertz, way below even what your home Wi-Fi router is. The plus is that signal reaches way deeper out into the forest. That signal reaches way further away into the rural areas away from cell phone towers. The negative is it's confusing because your data speeds aren't any faster. Matter of fact, they may be quite a bit slower the further and further out you get. So it's also so confusing. That being said, the network, the true 5G that we've been promised, this 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz, even though I don't know, physics does not bend. You cannot bend reality. So the only way to actually roll out this network, and I've talked about this before, is putting repeaters basically a few hundred yards away from each other. So it's not just one eyesore of a tower and, on the end of, for one neighborhood, the big fake 300-foot tree that's 200 feet taller, that's 250 feet taller than any other tree in the neighborhood. Oh, I wonder what that big giant sequoia is here in Houston, 200 feet above the nearest pine tree. That's a radio tower, honey. That's the cell phone tower. So you got that eyesore with a true, quote, 5G network operating 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz. You would need a repeater on every street corner, on every block. How do you hide that? So I'm not saying it's an impossible solution, but we haven't figured it out yet. Just the cost of adding that infrastructure, for one thing. You're going to have to go door to door and have people sign petitions that they even want that in their neighborhood. Hey, can we put this antenna in your yard and your neighbor's yard and the other neighbor's yard and every other neighbor's yard so you can have 5G? By the way, it won't go into your house because your windows will block it. Don't turn on your sprinklers because it can't go through the water of the sprinklers. Do you want this? Do you want this eyesore? But when you're right next to it, if you go in your backyard, hold your phone up to the antenna, you'll get those gigabit speeds. Oh yes, sign me up. Give me an eyesore in my backyard, please. So I know what some of you might be thinking. You can put that 5G 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz router in your home. And yes, you certainly could do that. But if you sit down on your couch with your laptop and a piece of tissue paper on the coffee table gets between your laptop and the router, you don't see the benefit of that network. It is blocked by the tissue. You need line of sight. And that would mean in your home, you would need to put these repeaters everywhere, in every corner where the ceiling meets the wall, where the ceiling meets at least two walls. In every corner of the room, you would need these repeaters. So again, none of this is physically impossible, but how many devices, how many things do you want in your house? How many antennas do you want to add to it? How many eyesores? And yes, you can mask them by making these things look like crown molding or what have you, but how much of that inconvenience do you want when all you're doing 90% of the time anyways is streaming Netflix, is streaming video, which your 2G, your 2.4 gigahertz router is more than capable of? Yes, we can talk about increased download speeds. So if you are a gamer and you have Steam and you want to download a 150 gigabyte video game in 2 minutes, sure. I mean, that's one thing. There's definitely going to be power users who absolutely want that. But they're not This technology isn't kind of being marketed towards power users. Any sort of technology like this, if it's going to take off and work on the whole, is advertised to the masses. And then when those masses realize this 5G isn't that super fast 20 gigahertz stuff, this is 600 megahertz. I mean, don't get me wrong, for the cellular coverage, I appreciate the extra coverage, but this isn't the super fast gigabit network we were all promised. I mean, this isn't the future of high-speed mobile data that we've been promising. And now you're saying the reality is if we want that bandwidth, the 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz, we have to basically inundate our lives with devices and all this extra cost. That's not going to work for the masses. The average person walking around downtown on their cell phone, looking at their cell phone, sending emails or whatever the heck they're doing that they're not looking up and they're tripping over curbs, that person isn't the power user. Or at least they're not the power user in that moment. They're just a random person going about their daily lives. In this ultra-fast 5G network they've been promised doesn't matter. So it's not physically impossible to implement. It's just how much of that inundation do you want in your life? And that brings me to this point, and I think I'm going to kind of wrap up with this. I'll really quickly say that the next Qualcomm chipset, the Snapdragon 865, which is 25% faster than the outgoing 855, now comes with mandatory 5G. So it's going to have that antenna ready to pick up those 20 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz signals built in. But that's beside my point. I'm just letting you know that the next generation of Qualcomm Snapdragons is going to have it for whenever it comes out. I'll kind of wrap up the show with this. And this is something that just zapped into my brain and heart as I'm recording Geek Therapy Radio this week. Earlier today, I was doing the St. Jude's radioathon. I took a call or two to take donations for that. It was awesome. By the time I left, we were about at $200,000 raised for St. Jude's. It was great. But I was talking to Garf, and Garf is, his show is on this station at 10 a.m. Saturdays, so several hours before my show, exactly 12 hours before my show. And he was asking me, so what's going on? What kind of like tech gadgets and holiday shopping lists? What should I kind of talk about? What can I mention, like new tech to recommend listeners and things like that? And honestly, there's plenty. There's just so much. There's so much stuff. I did mention that there's no new game consoles coming out this year, so that's usually a big seller, but that's not really happening this year. But it just kind of dawned on me, like, I am a super techie guy. Ask my wife, I've got too much. There comes a certain point where it's like, we have so much. So when do you just stop caring? Like, I don't care about the 5G cellular data network. I know it's really, really cool, but I don't care. I can't get excited about it. The ramifications of physics is more fascinating to me than actual having the product itself. So at what point does it become do you just get bored with new tech? New cell phones coming out. Is it that much better than last year's? No, then I don't really care about it. At what point is all the tech stuff just tough to get excited about anymore? Thanks for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Be sure to visit my friends at Best Automotive on North Park in Kingwood. They'll take care of your modern car or classic car. That's it for Geek Therapy Radio this week. Download the podcast, and I'll see you next week. Be good to yourselves and others, and know that you are worthy of love.